The trucker. The highway stretched endlessly before him, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the high desert like a scar on ancient skin. Thomas had been driving for 36 hours straight, his eyes burning with exhaustion, his hands cramped around the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler. The load he carried, agricultural equipment bound for the Northern Territories, was already 2 days late, and the penalty fees were mounting with each passing hour. He was 63 years old, though the mirror suggested someone much older. The years on the road had carved deep lines into his weathered face, had turned his hair from black to iron grey, had bent his spine into a permanent curve that echoed the arch of the highway itself. His clothes, stained with engine oil and road dust, hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight over the past year, though he couldn't say exactly when or how. Food had become merely fuel, sleep a luxury he could rarely afford. The sun was setting behind him, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust, when he first noticed the car on the shoulder of the road. It was a modest sedan, its hood raised like a distress signal, steam rising from the engine in pale wisps that dissolved into the evening air. A woman stood beside it, one hand shading her eyes as she watched the sparse traffic pass by. In her other arm, she held a small child, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, whose head rested against her shoulder. Thomas had seen thousands of stranded motorists over his 40 years on the road. He had stopped to help many of them in his younger days, when time seemed more abundant and his faith in humanity less weathered by experience. But lately, he had learned to keep driving. There were schedules to meet, deadlines to honor, penalties to avoid. The world had become harder, more demanding, less forgiving of those who paused to offer assistance. Yet something made him slow down. Perhaps it was the way the evening light caught the woman's face, revealing an expression of quiet desperation that reminded him of his own daughter, whom he hadn't seen in 3 years. Perhaps it was the child, so small and vulnerable in the vast emptiness of the desert. Or perhaps it was simply that he was tired of driving, tired of schedules, tired of the endless forward momentum that had consumed his life like a slow-burning fire. He pulled the massive truck onto the shoulder, air brakes hissing like a sigh of relief, and climbed down from the cab. His knees protested, his back ached, but he walked toward the stranded car with a determination that surprised even himself. "Evening," he called out, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. "Looks like you could use some help." The woman turned, and he saw the relief flood her features like sunrise breaking over dark water. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that carried the particular exhaustion of young motherhood. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "I've been here for over an hour. My phone died and nobody stopped. I think it's the radiator. It just started overheating and then the engine died completely." Thomas approached the car and peered under the hood, his practiced eye quickly assessing the damage. A split radiator hose, easily fixed if he had the right materials. He walked back to his truck and rummaged through his toolbox, finding a roll of heavy-duty tape and a jug of water he kept for emergencies. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked, his hands moving with the muscle memory of decades spent fixing broken things on lonely roads. "Elena," she replied, "and this is Sophie." She shifted the child in her arms, and Thomas saw that the little girl was sleeping now, her face peaceful despite the circumstances. "Where are you headed, Elena?" "Phoenix. My mother's there. She's sick. Cancer." Her voice caught on the word, and Thomas heard in that single syllable the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. "I'm supposed to be there by tomorrow morning for her surgery. I left San Diego this morning, but I got a late start, and then this happened." Thomas worked in silence for a few moments, wrapping the damaged hose with layer upon layer of tape. It wouldn't last forever, but it would get her to the next town, maybe even to Phoenix, if she drove carefully and stopped to let the engine cool periodically. "This'll hold," he said finally, straightening up with a wince that he tried to hide. But you'll need to watch your temperature gauge. If it starts to climb into the red, pull over immediately and let it cool down. And you'll want to keep your speed down, no more than 60, understand?" Elena nodded, tears beginning to streak down her face. "I don't know how to thank you. I was so scared. I kept thinking about my mother, about not making it in time, about Sophie being stuck out here in the dark." Thomas filled the radiator with water from his jug, then checked the oil level and tire pressure out of habit. When everything was as good as it could be under the circumstances, he closed the hood and turned back to Elena. "You got enough money for gas?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Thomas read the truth. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 $20 bills, nearly all the cash he had left until his next payment cleared. He pressed them into her hand before she could protest. "No," she began. "I can't. For Sophie," he interrupted gently. "Make sure you stop and get something to eat. And if you need help along the way, there's a truck stop about 60 miles up the road. Ask for Big Mike. Tell him Thomas sent you. He'll make sure you're taken care of." Eleanor was crying openly now, clutching the money like a lifeline. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the western sky. "Had a daughter once," he said finally. "She'd be about your age now. Haven't seen her in a long time. My choice, mostly. Spent too many years choosing the road over her, choosing work over family. Figured maybe if I help you get to your mother in time, maybe somewhere in the universe, it balances out a little bit. Maybe it means something." He walked back to his truck before she could respond, before the emotion rising in his chest could spill over into words he wasn't ready to speak. As he climbed into the cab and started the engine, he saw Elena wave, saw her mouth "thank you" one more time, saw little Sophie wake up and wave her small hand in his direction. Thomas pulled back onto the highway, his load still late, his penalty fees still mounting. But something had shifted inside him. For the first time in years, the weight he carried felt a little lighter. 3 months passed like water through open fingers. Thomas continued his routes, crisscrossing the country in his aging truck, delivering loads that all blurred together in his memory. The encounter with Elena and Sophie had faded into the background of his mind, just another moment among thousands on the endless highway. He had almost forgotten about it entirely when his truck's transmission finally gave out just outside of Albuquerque. The repair shop's estimate made his stomach drop. $8,000, maybe more, depending on what else they found when they opened up the transmission. Thomas had maybe $3,000 in his savings account, and that was supposed to be for emergencies. Though he supposed this qualified. Without the truck, he couldn't work. Without work, he couldn't pay rent, couldn't eat, couldn't survive. He sat in the shop's waiting room, his head in his hands, trying to calculate how many credit cards he could max out, how many payday loans he could take, how deep he could dig himself into debt and still have a chance of climbing back out. The math didn't work, no matter how many times he ran through it. Thomas Hendricks. He looked up to see a woman standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. It took him a moment to recognize her. Elena, though she looked different now, healthier somehow, less desperate, wearing professional clothes and carrying a leather briefcase. "Elena," he said, standing up slowly. "What are you? How did you find me?" She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "I work here. Well, I own here, actually. This is my shop." Thomas looked around in confusion, taking in the clean floors, the modern equipment, the certificates on the walls. "Your shop? But I thought you were going to see your mother." I did. Thanks to you, I made it in time." She sat down beside him, setting her briefcase on the floor. "The surgery went well. She's in remission now, doing great, actually. She'll be 2 years cancer-free next month." "That's wonderful," Thomas said, meaning it, though he still didn't understand what she was doing here. Elena leaned forward, her eyes intense with an emotion he couldn't quite name. After that night on the highway, after you helped us, something changed for me. I'd been drifting, working dead-end jobs, barely making rent, feeling like life was just something that happened to me rather than something I could shape. But you, a complete stranger who looked like he had his own troubles, you stopped, you helped. You gave me money you probably couldn't afford to give. She pulled a worn photograph from her briefcase and handed it to him. It showed her mother and Sophie all smiling, standing in front of this very shop. The sign above them read, "Elena's Auto Repair, honest service, fair prices." That night made me realize something, she continued. Made me realize that I wanted to be the kind of person who helped others, who made a difference. I went back to school, automotive technology program at the community college, worked 3 jobs while I studied. Mum helped watch Sophie. And when I graduated top of my class, my mother and I pooled everything we had to open this place. That was 18 months ago. Thomas felt tears burning in his eyes, though he wasn't sure why. "I don't understand why you're telling me this." "Because your truck came into my shop today. Because when I saw your name on the work order, I knew exactly who you were. Because I've thought about you probably once a week for the past 3 months, wondering if I'd ever get a chance to thank you properly." She stood up and extended her hand. "Come on, let me show you something." In a daze, Thomas followed her out to the shop floor, where his truck sat elevated on a lift, its transmission exposed like the innards of some great mechanical beast. 3 mechanics were working on it, their movements efficient and practiced. "My team's been at it all morning," Elena said. "New transmission, new clutch assembly. We're replacing the brake pads that were down to nothing, fixing that oil leak you've probably been ignoring. Should be done by tomorrow morning." Thomas felt the room tilt slightly. "Elena, I can't afford—" "No charge," she said firmly. "Not 1 penny. You gave me $60 when you probably didn't have $60 to spare. You gave me something much more valuable than that. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me an example of what it means to be decent, to be kind, to help someone even when it costs you something. But the parts alone must cost, are worth every cent if it means paying forward what you gave me." She put her hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thomas, do you know what you really gave me that night? You gave me the belief that I could be better than my circumstances, that I could build something meaningful, that one person's kindness could change everything. This shop, it's successful because I built it on that principle. Fair prices, honest work, and we help people who are stranded, who are desperate, who are at the end of their rope. We've fixed dozens of cars for free or at cost for people who couldn't afford repairs. And you know what? The universe pays it back. Word spreads. People come here because they know we care. Business is good." Thomas sat down on a nearby stool, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He thought about all the times he had driven past stranded motorists, all the times he had chosen efficiency over compassion, all the years he had spent focused solely on his own survival. He thought about his daughter, who had stopped returning his calls 2 years ago, who had told him in their last conversation that she didn't know who he was anymore, that the father she remembered had disappeared somewhere on those endless highways. "I'm not a good person," he said quietly. "That night, stopping to help you, that wasn't normal for me. I don't know why I did it. I've driven past hundreds of people in trouble over the years." Elena crouched down in front of him, making him meet her eyes. "But you stopped that time. You stopped when it mattered. Maybe that's all any of us can do, be good when it counts, even if we can't be good all the time. And maybe by being good once in one moment, we start becoming better in all the other moments too." She stood up and pulled a business card from her pocket, writing something on the back before handing it to him. "That's my personal cell phone number. After your truck is fixed, I want you to come have dinner with my family. My mother wants to meet you. Sophie asks about the nice trucker who helped us. I know you said you haven't seen your daughter in a long time. Maybe it's time to change that. Maybe it's time to stop driving away from the things that matter." The dinner happened 3 weeks later, after Thomas had picked up his truck, after he had stared at Elena's business card for days, after he had finally found the courage to call his daughter for the first time in 3 years. The conversation with Melissa had been brief, awkward, filled with long silences and careful words, but she had agreed to meet him. She had agreed to give him a chance, though she couldn't promise more than that. The meeting was scheduled for the following month, in Seattle, where she lived with her husband and 2 children, grandchildren Thomas had never met. Elena's home was modest but warm, filled with the kind of comfortable clutter that spoke of real life being lived. Children's drawings on the refrigerator, books stacked on tables, a well-used guitar leaning against the wall. Her mother, Maria, greeted him at the door with a hug that felt like absolution, and Sophie ran up to him and grabbed his hand, chattering about her day at preschool with the unself-conscious joy of a child who had no reason to fear strangers. Over a meal of homemade enchiladas and rice, Thomas found himself talking in ways he hadn't in years. He told them about his early days as a trucker, about the romance he had once felt for the open road, about how that romance had slowly curdled into mere routine. He told them about his wife, who had died 15 years earlier, about how he had thrown himself into work because it was easier than feeling her absence. He told them about Melissa, about the graduations he had missed, the birthdays he had forgotten, the slow erosion of their relationship until it had crumbled entirely. "I told myself I was doing it for her," he said, pushing food around his plate. "Told myself I was working hard to provide for her, to give her opportunities I never had. But the truth is, I was running away from grief, from responsibility, from the difficulty of actually being present in my own life." Maria reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "But you stopped running that night on the highway. You stopped for my daughter and granddaughter. That counts for something." "Does it?" Thomas asked, and he heard the raw doubt in his own voice. "One good act in 40 years of selfishness?" "One good act that changed everything," Elena interjected. "Thomas, you don't see it, but I do. That night was a turning point for me, and from what you've told us about calling your daughter, it sounds like it was a turning point for you too. Maybe we don't change all at once. Maybe we change in moments, in small decisions that end up meaning more than we realize at the time." After dinner, Sophie fell asleep on the couch, her small body curled up like a question mark, and the adults moved to the back porch where the evening air was cool and desert stars blazed overhead like scattered diamonds. Elena brought out coffee, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the city. "I never told you," Maria said eventually, her voice soft with memory, "what I was thinking about when Elena arrived at the hospital that night. I had been praying, you see, not just for the surgery to go well, but for Eleanor. She had been struggling so much, with money, with single motherhood, with feeling like life was just an endless series of obstacles. I had been praying that something would give her hope, would show her that the world wasn't as cold and hard as it seemed." She turned to look at Thomas, her eyes reflecting starlight. "And then she walked into my hospital room and told me about you. About how you had stopped, how you had fixed her car, how you had given her money and directions and kindness when she had almost given up. And I knew that prayers are answered in the most unexpected ways, through the most unexpected people." Thomas felt something crack open inside his chest. Some hardened place that had been frozen for so long he had forgotten it was there. "I'm not anyone's answer to prayer. I'm just an old trucker who's made more mistakes than I can count." "Maybe that's exactly what makes you the answer," Maria said gently, "because you understand what it's like to struggle, to fail, to need help. Perfect people can't really help anyone. They don't understand what it's like to be lost. But broken people who choose kindness anyway, who stop and help even when they're barely holding themselves together, those are the people who change the world, one small act at a time." The meeting with Melissa took place on a grey Seattle morning in a small coffee shop near Pike Place Market. Thomas arrived 30 minutes early, his hands trembling as he ordered coffee he was too nervous to drink. He had barely slept the night before, had changed his shirt 3 times that morning, had almost turned his truck around a dozen times during the drive north. When Melissa walked through the door, he almost didn't recognize her. She was 32 now, a grown woman with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin, wearing professional clothes and carrying herself with a confidence he didn't remember. She saw him immediately, hesitated for just a moment, then walked to his table with measured steps. "Hi, Dad," she said, and those 2 words carried the weight of 3 years of silence, of a lifetime of disappointments, of hope that hadn't quite died, despite having every reason to. "Hi, sweetheart," he managed, standing awkwardly, unsure whether to hug her or shake her hand or simply sit back down. She made the decision for him, stepping forward and embracing him briefly, not the hug of his memories, when she was young and he was her hero, but not nothing either. It was a beginning. They talked for 3 hours, slowly at first, circling around the difficult topics before finally diving in. Melissa told him about her anger, her hurt, her feeling of abandonment. She told him about her wedding, which he had missed because he was on a cross-country haul he could have rescheduled. She told him about the birth of his first grandchild, how she had waited to call him until she was sure she wouldn't cry, and how when she finally did call, he'd been too busy to talk for more than 5 minutes. "I'm so sorry," Thomas said, and the words felt completely inadequate. "I'm sorry for all of it. For choosing work over you, for not being there, for being so focused on providing that I forgot about being present. Your mother?" She tried to tell me. She tried to warn me that you were growing up, that I was missing it. But I didn't listen. And then she was gone, and I buried myself in work even deeper because I didn't know how else to cope. Melissa was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "Why now, Dad? Why reach out after 3 years? What changed?" So Thomas told her about the highway, about Elena and Sophie, about the broken-down car, and the small act of kindness that had somehow shifted something fundamental inside him. He told her about Elena's shop, about the dinner with her family, about Maria's words concerning broken people and answered prayers. "It made me realize that I've been driving away from everything that matters for most of my life," he said, "and that if I kept driving, I'd end up at the end of my days with nothing but regrets and empty highways behind me. I don't know if I can be the father you deserve. I don't know if I can make up for all the years I wasted, but I want to try. If you'll let me, I want to try." Melissa reached across the table and took his weathered hand in her smoother one. "I have conditions," she said. "I need you to understand that trust isn't automatic, that you can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. You hurt me, Dad, deeply, and it's going to take time and work to heal that." "I understand," Thomas said. "I'll do whatever it takes. I need you to be present, not just physically here, but actually present. That means putting down your phone when we're talking. That means remembering birthdays and showing up when you say you will. That means being a grandfather to my children, not just a stranger who sends cards twice a year." "I can do that," Thomas said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "And I need you to be patient with me. Some days I'm going to be angry. Some days I'm going to remember all the times you let me down, and it's going to be hard for me to see past that. You don't get to be defensive or hurt when that happens. You need to understand that this is your mess to clean up." "I understand," Thomas said again. Melissa squeezed his hand, and for the first time since she had walked through the door, she smiled. A small, tentative smile, but real. "Okay then, let's try this. But we're starting slow. Coffee once a month to start, phone calls once a week, and if you're going to be part of my kids' lives, you need to be reliable. They're 7 and 4, and they don't understand complicated adult reasons for why people disappear. If you're going to be their grandfather, you need to actually be their grandfather." "I will be," Thomas promised. "I swear to you, I will be." They talked for another hour, the conversation gradually becoming easier, more natural. Melissa showed him pictures of his grandchildren, Emma and Jack, their faces round with childhood, their smiles innocent and wide. She told him about her job as a teacher, about her husband David, who was an engineer, about their life in a small house in the suburbs with a garden Melissa was constantly trying to keep alive, despite her admitted lack of green thumb. When they finally parted ways, Melissa hugged him again, and this time it lasted a few seconds longer. "I'm glad you stopped for that woman on the highway," she said softly. "I'm glad you're trying to be better. Just don't give up on it, okay? Don't go back to who you were before." "I won't," Thomas said. "I promise I won't." 2 years passed, and they were perhaps the most transformative of Thomas's life. He cut back his hours, taking shorter routes and regional deliveries that allowed him to return home more frequently. The pay was less, but he discovered he needed less than he had thought. He moved into a smaller apartment, sold his second truck, started living within his means rather than constantly chasing the next paycheck. He called Melissa every Sunday evening, without fail. At first, the conversations were stilted, careful, both of them navigating the wounded landscape between them with tentative steps. But gradually, week by week, month by month, something began to heal. She started calling him outside of their scheduled times, just to share something funny Jack had said, or to ask his advice about a problem at work. He started sending the grandchildren postcards from every city he visited, filling them with stories and drawings that delighted the children and, he suspected, meant something to Melissa too. He visited Seattle once a month, planning his routes to ensure he had a full weekend in the city. He attended Emma's ballet recital, Jack's first t-ball game, birthdays and school plays, and family dinners that filled the hollow places inside him with something he had almost forgotten: joy, simple and uncomplicated. He kept in touch with Elena's family too. He stopped by the shop whenever his routes took him through Albuquerque, always greeted with warm hugs and updates on Sophie's progress in school. Elena's business continued to grow, and she had started a foundation that provided free automotive repairs for single mothers and low-income families. She asked Thomas to join the board of directors, and though he protested that he had no business expertise, she insisted that his perspective, the understanding of what it meant to struggle, to need help, was exactly what the foundation needed. It was at one of the foundation board meetings, 18 months after his first dinner with Elena's family, that Thomas met Robert. Robert was a corporate lawyer who had recently taken early retirement after his firm was acquired by a larger company. He was looking for meaningful ways to use his time and resources, and Elena had invited him to learn about the foundation's work. During the meeting, Thomas found himself seated next to Robert, and they struck up a conversation during a break. "I appreciate what this foundation does," Robert said, sipping his coffee. "The practical support is valuable, of course, but I think what really matters is the dignity you give people. The message that they're worth helping, that they matter." Thomas nodded, recognizing something in the other man's tone. A weariness, perhaps, or a searching for meaning that resonated with his own journey. "You sound like someone who's been thinking about these things." Robert smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I spent 30 years building a career, accumulating money, climbing the corporate ladder. And now I'm 65. My wife passed away 5 years ago. My kids are grown and living their own lives, and I'm sitting in a house that's far too big and far too empty, wondering what any of it was for." "I know that feeling," Thomas said quietly. "Spent most of my life driving, always moving, thinking that if I just kept working hard enough, kept providing enough, it would all mean something. Took me way too long to realize that meaning doesn't come from what you accumulate. It comes from who you connect with, who you help, what you give away rather than what you keep." They talked for the rest of the meeting break, and then continued their conversation over dinner at a nearby restaurant. Robert told Thomas about his marriage, about how work had slowly consumed him until his relationship with his wife had become more about logistics than love. She had died of a sudden heart attack, and her death had shattered the comfortable illusions he had built around his life. I kept thinking I had more time, Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. Kept thinking we'd reconnect after I retired, that we'd travel and rediscover each other. But time doesn't care about our plans. And now I have all this time, and no one to share it with. Thomas shared his own story then, all of it, from the early days with his wife to her death, from his estrangement from Melissa to the night he stopped to help Elena on the highway. He talked about the slow, difficult process of rebuilding his relationship with his daughter, about the grandchildren who were teaching him what it meant to be present, about the way one small act of kindness had somehow set in motion a transformation he was still trying to fully understand. "So what do I do?" Robert asked. "How do I find meaning now, at this stage of life?" Thomas thought for a long moment before answering. "I think you do what I'm trying to do. You find ways to help people. You look for the moments where you can make a difference, even if it's small. You stop running away from connection and start moving toward it. And you forgive yourself for the time you wasted, while also refusing to waste the time you have left." That conversation was the beginning of a friendship that would shape the rest of both their lives. Robert became deeply involved with Elena's foundation, using his legal expertise to help expand its reach. He also reconnected with his own children, beginning the difficult work of rebuilding relationships that had atrophied from neglect. And he and Thomas became regular companions, two men navigating the territory of late-life transformation, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating the small victories. 3 years after stopping to help Elena on that desert highway, Thomas found himself standing in a very different place, literally and figuratively. He was in Seattle, in Melissa's backyard, watching his grandchildren play in an inflatable pool while he manned the grill at a family barbecue. It was Emma's 9th birthday, and the yard was full of children's laughter, brightly colored decorations, and the kind of chaotic joy that comes from a house filled with love. David, Melissa's husband, was helping him with the grill, and they had developed an easy camaraderie over the past couple of years. "You know," David said, flipping a burger, "when Melissa first told me you were coming back into her life, I was skeptical. Protective, you know. She'd been hurt by your absence, and I didn't want to see her hurt again." Thomas nodded, accepting the criticism as deserved. "I don't blame you for that. I wouldn't have trusted me either. But you've really shown up," David continued. "Not just physically, but in all the ways that matter. The kids adore you, and Melissa, she's happier. She didn't realize how much your absence was still weighing on her until you started being present, so thank you for that. Thank you for doing the work." Before Thomas could respond, Emma ran up to them, water dripping from her swimsuit, her face lit up with excitement. "Grandpa, Grandpa, will you tell us the story? The one about the lady and the broken car?" Thomas had told his grandchildren a simplified version of the encounter with Elena, framing it as a story about helping people in need. It had become one of their favorite tales, and they often asked him to repeat it. "After we eat, sweetheart," Thomas promised. "Go play with your brother for a bit." Emma scampered off, and Melissa emerged from the house carrying a tray of condiments. She had her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and for a moment Thomas saw her as she had been at 8 years old, running through the sprinklers in their old backyard, calling for him to watch her cartwheels. He blinked back unexpected tears. "You okay, Dad?" Melissa asked, setting down the tray and looking at him with concern. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, how close I came to missing all of this." Melissa moved closer and put her arm around his waist, leaning her head against his shoulder. "But you didn't miss it. You're here. That's what matters." Later, after the food had been consumed and the cake reduced to crumbs, after the presents had been opened and the other party guests had gone home, Thomas sat in the living room with Emma and Jack curled up on either side of him. Melissa and David were in the kitchen cleaning up, and through the window Thomas could see the sun beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. "Tell the story now, Grandpa," Emma insisted, snuggling closer. So Thomas told them about the highway, about the broken car and the worried mother and the sleeping child. He told them about fixing the radiator hose with tape, about giving Elena money for gas, about how one small act of kindness had rippled outward in unexpected ways. "But why did you stop?" Jack asked, his 7-year-old mind trying to understand. "If you were in a hurry, why did you stop?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer in a way his grandchildren would understand. "I stopped because I remembered something important. I remembered that the things we own, the money we make, the places we go, none of that matters as much as the people we help and the connections we make. I had forgotten that for a long time, and stopping to help that lady reminded me. I want to be helpful like you, Grandpa," Emma said seriously. "I want to stop and help people." "Then you will," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "But you know what? You're already helpful. You help your brother when he's sad. You help your mum and dad around the house. You help your friends at school. Helping doesn't always mean fixing cars on the highway. Sometimes it just means being kind, being present, being willing to see when someone needs something and offering what you can give." Jack was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mom says you weren't always around when she was little, that you were gone a lot." Thomas felt his heart clench. "That's true. I made mistakes when your mom was young. I thought work was more important than being with family, and I was wrong. But your mom gave me a chance to do better, to be better. And that's one of the most important things you can learn, that it's never too late to change, to apologize, to try to make things right. We're glad you're here now," Emma said simply, and the pure acceptance in her voice nearly undid him. Indeed, 5 years after that night on the desert highway, Elena called Thomas with unexpected news. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's initial dreams, serving hundreds of families across 3 states. Corporate sponsors had taken notice, and a major automotive company wanted to do a feature story about their work for their national advertising campaign. "They want to interview you," Elena said. "They want to tell your story about stopping to help us that night, about how it changed both our lives. I told them I'd have to ask you first. I know you're private and I don't want to pressure you, but Thomas, this could bring so much attention to the foundation. It could help us expand our reach, help even more people." Thomas's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of being on camera, of having his story told to millions of people, made him deeply uncomfortable. He was no hero, no inspiration, just an old trucker who had stopped once when he should have stopped countless times before. But then he thought about Eleanor and Sophie, about Maria's words concerning answered prayers and broken people who choose kindness. He thought about Robert and the friendship that had grown from their shared understanding of lost time and second chances. He thought about Melissa and his grandchildren, about the life he almost missed because he was too busy driving away from everything that mattered. "Okay," he said finally. "If you think it'll help the foundation, then okay, I'll do it." The filming took place over several days. They interviewed Thomas at the foundation's office, at Elena's shop, and at the stretch of highway where he had first encountered the broken-down car. They spoke with Elena and Maria, with Robert and, with Thomas's permission, with Melissa and his grandchildren. The most difficult part was watching his daughter talk about their estrangement and reconciliation. She was honest, but kind, speaking about the pain of his absence, but also about the joy of his return. "My dad is proof that it's never too late to change," she said to the camera. "He spent most of my childhood choosing work over family. But when he finally stopped, when he finally opened his eyes to what really mattered, he didn't just change a little. He transformed his whole life. And that transformation started with one small act of kindness to a stranger on a highway." When the advertising campaign launched 6 months later, it exceeded everyone's expectations. The commercials aired during major sporting events and primetime television. The foundation's website was flooded with donations, volunteer applications, and messages from people sharing their own stories of roadside assistance and unexpected kindness. But more than the money or attention, what struck Thomas were the letters. Hundreds of them, then thousands, from people who had seen the commercials and felt compelled to reach out. Some were from people who had been helped by strangers in their own times of need. Others were from people inspired to start their own acts of service. Still others were from adult children who had watched the story and decided to reach out to estranged parents, or from parents reaching out to children they had lost touch with, all of them recognizing in Thomas's story echoes of their own lives and relationships. One letter in particular moved Thomas to tears. It was from a woman named Patricia who wrote, "I saw your story on television last night, and I couldn't stop crying. For 15 years I've been estranged from my son. It started with a small argument, then pride got in the way, then time passed and the silence became its own kind of wall between us. I kept telling myself it was too late, that too much damage had been done. But your story reminded me that it's never too late to try. This morning, I called my son for the first time in 15 years. We talked for 3 hours. We cried together. We're going to start seeing a family therapist to work through everything. I don't know if we can rebuild what was lost, but we're going to try. And it's because of your story, because you had the courage to stop on that highway and then the courage to rebuild your own broken relationships. Thank you for showing me that redemption is possible. Lee." Thomas read that letter aloud to Elena, to Robert, to Melissa, his voice breaking multiple times. When he finished, they sat together in silence, each of them understanding in their own way the weight of those words. "You changed her life," Elena said softly, "just like you changed mine." "She changed her own life," Thomas corrected gently. "She made the choice to reach out, to try. I just reminded her that it was possible." "Isn't that what we all need sometimes?" Robert mused. "Just a reminder that change is possible, that it's not too late, that one moment of kindness can shift everything." Thomas retired from trucking at 68, selling his rig and taking a part-time position with Elena's foundation, coordinating their roadside assistance program. He moved to Albuquerque, into a small house within walking distance of Elena's shop. He had dinner with her family every Sunday, watched Sophie grow from a toddler into a bright, compassionate young girl who talked about becoming a teacher to help other children. He visited Seattle once a month, every month, without fail. He was there for Emma's middle school graduation, for Jack's first basketball game, for countless school plays and family dinners and ordinary moments that had once seemed mundane, but now felt precious beyond measure. Melissa often said that the past 5 years had given her the father she always wanted, and while Thomas still carried guilt about the years he had wasted, he tried to focus on the years he had been given to make amends. On his 70th birthday, his small house was filled with people. Melissa and her family had flown in from Seattle. Elena and her family were there, along with Robert and a dozen volunteers from the foundation. They shared a meal, told stories, laughed until their sides hurt. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Thomas found himself standing in his backyard, looking up at the stars. Robert joined him, 2 old men contemplating the vastness above them. "Do you ever think about that night?" Robert asked. "The night you stopped to help Elena?" "All the time," Thomas admitted. "I think about how close I came to driving past. I was tired. I was late. I had every logical reason to keep going, but something made me stop." "What do you think it was?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I think it was the last echo of who I used to be, before grief and work hardened me. Some small part of me that still believed in kindness, in connection, in the possibility that one person could make a difference in another person's life. And I think stopping to help them woke up the rest of me. Reminded me of who I wanted to be, who I could still become if I was willing to do the work." "Did you have any regrets?" Robert asked. Thousands, Thomas said honestly. I regret the years I wasted, the moments I missed, the people I hurt through my absence. But I've learned that regret can be a teacher if you let it. It can show you what matters, what you should protect, what you can't afford to lose again. They stood in comfortable silence, and Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here, from that desert highway to this backyard, from estrangement to reconciliation, from empty highways to a life filled with connection and meaning. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and difficult conversations, moments when the weight of past mistakes felt crushing. But he had kept showing up, kept trying, kept choosing presence over absence, connection over isolation, service over selfishness. You know what I've realized? Thomas said eventually. The truest thing I've learned from all of this? What's that? That we're never too lost to be found. We're never too broken to be healed. We're never so far down the wrong road that we can't turn around and choose a better direction. But we have to be willing to stop. We have to be willing to see the people who need help, including ourselves. We have to be willing to do the hard work of change, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means facing all the ways we've failed. Robert nodded slowly. And you have to be willing to accept grace from others and from yourself. Yes, Thomas agreed. That might be the hardest part. Accepting that despite all my mistakes, I still deserve connection, still deserve love, still deserve the chance to be better. Thomas lived another 12 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at 82. His funeral was attended by hundreds. Family, friends, people whose lives he had touched through the foundation, and others who simply wanted to honor a man who had showed them that it's never too late to change. Elena gave the eulogy, standing at the podium with Sophie beside her. Sophie, who was now a college student studying social work, who credited Thomas with showing her the power of one person's kindness to change the world. Thomas once told me that he wasn't a good person, Elena said, her voice carrying across the crowded church. He said that stopping to help us that night on the highway was an anomaly, not his normal behavior. But I think he was wrong about that. I think the Thomas who stopped that night was his true self, the self that had been buried under years of grief and work and running away from pain. And when he stopped for us, when he chose kindness over efficiency, connection over isolation, he rediscovered that true self, and he spent the rest of his life honoring it, nurturing it, sharing it with everyone he met. She paused, looking out at the gathered mourners. Thomas changed my life. He changed my daughter's life. He changed the lives of thousands of people through the foundation we built together. But I think what he would want us to remember isn't just what he did for others. He would want us to remember that all of us have that power. All of us can stop when we see someone in need. All of us can choose kindness, even when it's inconvenient. All of us can transform our own lives and the lives of others through small acts of compassion. Melissa spoke next, her voice steady despite her tears. She talked about reconciliation and redemption, about a father who had been absent and then found his way home, about the precious years they had shared after he stopped running away. She ended by reading a letter Thomas had written to her shortly before his death, a letter thanking her for giving him a second chance, for teaching him what it meant to truly be present, for showing him that love could be stronger than regret. After the service, as people gathered for a reception, stories circulated like prayers. The single mother whose car Thomas had repaired for free through the foundation, allowing her to keep her job and support her children. The young man Thomas had mentored, helping him find direction when he was lost and angry. The countless volunteers Thomas had inspired through his quiet example of service and dedication. And always, people returned to that night on the highway, the moment when everything changed, when one tired trucker made a choice that rippled outward in ways he could never have predicted. That choice to stop, to help, to connect. It had been the pebble that started an avalanche of transformation. Years later, long after Thomas was gone, the foundation continued to grow. Elena eventually handed leadership to Sophie, who brought fresh energy and vision while honoring the principles her mother and Thomas had established. The foundation expanded nationally, then internationally, always maintaining its core mission: to help people in need while treating them with dignity and respect, and to remind everyone involved that small acts of kindness can change everything. On the wall of the Foundation's main office hung a photograph of Thomas, weathered and smiling, standing beside his old truck. Beneath it was a plaque with words he had once spoken in an interview. "I spent most of my life driving away from what mattered. Then one night I stopped. That's all it took, just stopping, just paying attention to someone else's need instead of my own schedule, just choosing connection over efficiency. Everything else followed from that one choice." So if there's something I want people to remember, it's this: stop, pay attention, help when you can, because you never know when one small act of kindness might change everything for the person you help and for yourself. The highway where Thomas first encountered Elena and Sophie remained unchanged. The same desert landscape, the same endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through ancient terrain. But now, when travelers broke down on that stretch of road, they found themselves surrounded by kindness. The Foundation had established partnerships with local tow companies and repair shops, ensuring that no one was left stranded, that everyone was treated with care and respect. And sometimes, on certain evenings when the light fell just right across the desert, drivers would report seeing an old truck pulled onto the shoulder, an elderly man climbing down to help someone in need. These reports were always dismissed as tricks of light or imagination, but those who had known Thomas, who had been touched by his kindness, wondered if perhaps something of his spirit remained on that highway. A reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the desert, even on the loneliest roads, connection is possible, transformation is real, and it's never too late to stop running and start living. The story didn't end with Thomas's death. Stories like his never truly end. They live on in every person who chooses kindness over convenience. In every moment, someone stops to help a stranger. In every reconciliation between estranged family members. In every small act of compassion that ripples outward in unexpected ways. Thomas's grandchildren grew up hearing his story, and they told it to their own children, and each generation found in it the same essential truth: that we are all capable of transformation, that our worst mistakes don't have to define us, that one choice to stop and help can change everything. And so the highway remained, a place of transit and transformation where lonely travelers occasionally found unexpected grace, where the ordinary act of stopping could become the first step in a journey toward redemption. The desert winds still blew across that landscape, carrying with them the whispers of countless stories, countless lives touched by simple kindness, countless transformations begun in a single moment of choosing to stop. In the end, that was Thomas's true legacy. Not a foundation or a viral story, or even the rebuilt relationships with his family, precious as those were. His true legacy was the reminder that each of us, in every moment, has the power to choose, to keep driving or to stop, to remain isolated or to connect, to stay lost in our own concerns or to reach out to others in theirs. And in that choice, in that moment of deciding to stop and pay attention and offer help, lies the possibility of everything changing. Not just for the person we help, but for ourselves. Because sometimes the person most in need of rescue is the one doing the rescuing, and sometimes the longest journey isn't measured in miles, but in the distance we travel from who we were to who we're meant to be. The highway continues, as highways do, carrying its endless stream of travelers, each with their own stories, their own struggles, their own chances to stop and help, to transform and be transformed. And somewhere in the vastness of it all, in the ordinary moments that become extraordinary through acts of simple kindness, the echo of Thomas's choice continues to resonate, reminding us all that it's never too late to stop running, never too late to come home, never too late to become the people we were always meant to be.